In the summer of 1985, the small town of Tillamook, Oregon, nestled between the rugged Coast Range and the misty shores of the Pacific, was a haven of logging camps, dairy farms, and quiet pride. The air carried the scent of pine, sea salt, and fresh-cut timber, while the local bar, the Rusty Anchor, hummed with the strum of Johnny Cash from a battered jukebox. Tillamook was known for its cheese factory, its annual county fair, and its dense forests, where locals hiked and camped under towering Douglas firs. But on a foggy July weekend, the town's tranquility cracked when Deputy Sarah Whitaker, a 28-year-old officer with the Tillamook County Sheriff's Department, vanished during a solo camping trip in the nearby Siuslaw National Forest. Sarah was a hometown girl, raised on a dairy farm just outside town, her laugh as familiar as the foghorns along the coast. She joined the Sheriff's Department 3 years earlier, eager to serve her community and prove herself in a male-dominated field. Known for her grit and her knack for talking down even the rowdiest loggers at the Rusty Anchor, Sarah was a rising star. That weekend, she'd taken a rare day off to camp near Devil's Cauldron, a remote clearing in the forest known for its scenic views and a nearby limestone cave, a local legend said to be haunted. She told her brother, Tom, she needed a night under the stars to clear her head. Her last contact was a quick chat with a park ranger on Saturday morning, confirming her campsite. By Sunday, she was gone. Search parties found her tent at Devil's Cauldron, neatly pitched, her backpack inside with a half-eaten granola bar and a thermos of coffee. Her sheriff's radio lay silent, batteries dead. A mile away, in the mouth of the limestone cave, a hiker discovered Sarah's body, her deputy badge pinned to her jacket, a single gunshot wound to her chest. The scene was grim but puzzling. No signs of a struggle, no footprints in the damp cave floor, no weapon. The Tillamook Sheriff's Office, led by Sheriff Earl Granger, ruled it a homicide, possibly tied to a drifter or a personal dispute. Locals whispered about drug runners using the forest trails, but with no leads, the case went cold, a scar on Tillamook's tight-knit soul. Sarah's parents, Ellen and Frank Whitaker, kept her memory alive, tending a small memorial at the town's Lutheran church, where her photo sat beside a vase of wildflowers. By 2001, Tillamook had evolved. The cheese factory was now a tourist draw, and dial-up internet buzzed in homes, but the forest remained untamed, and the Rusty Anchor still served burgers to loggers and retirees. Detective Margaret Magiholt, 46, had returned to Tillamook after years with the Portland Police Bureau. Maggie had grown up here, a shy girl who tagged along with Sarah on camping trips, idolizing her boldness. Sarah's murder had driven Maggie to law enforcement, but the weight of unsolved grief and a recent divorce had brought her back home, seeking solace in familiar pines. Now a detective with the county sheriff's office, Maggie carried a quiet resolve and a habit of rubbing an old silver ring, Sarah's, a gift from their childhood, when deep in thought. On a rainy October morning, Henry Larson, a 67-year-old retired forest ranger and avid birdwatcher, was hiking near Devil's Cauldron for his weekly survey of owl nests. In the limestone cave, now overgrown with moss, he noticed a glint beneath a pile of rocks. Digging carefully, he unearthed a rusted .38 revolver, its serial number partially scratched off, wrapped in a faded bandana. Nearby was a small, waterlogged leather journal, its pages stuck together but legible. The journal bore Sarah's initials, SW, and entries from July 1985. Trails busy at night. Trucks, no plates. Granger's deputy was there. Not safe. Henry, a gruff man who'd known Sarah's family, brought the find to the sheriff's office, where it landed on Maggie's desk. Maggie's breath caught as she opened the journal. Sarah's familiar handwriting stirred memories of summer hikes and campfire stories. The entries were sparse but chilling, mentioning shipments through the forest and a deal involving someone high up. Sheriff Granger, now in his 70s and living on a pension in a coastal cabin, had overseen Sarah's case. Had he overlooked evidence, or worse, buried it? The revolver's serial number was too damaged to trace immediately, but ballistics could link it to the bullet that killed Sarah. Maggie's mind raced. Why was the gun hidden in the cave? What had Sarah seen in the forest? She headed to the Rusty Anchor, where the jukebox now played Alan Jackson, but the vibe was pure 1980s, neon beer signs, checkered tablecloths, and the smell of fried onions. Over coffee, locals reminisced about Sarah. "She was fearless," said Betty Klein, a retired librarian. "Asked too many questions about those trucks in the woods." Maggie nodded, her thoughts on the journal. The forest trails were known for deer hunting, but in the 80s, rumors of drug smuggling, cocaine moving north from California, had swirled. Had Sarah stumbled onto a trafficking route? That evening, Maggie visited Ellen and Frank Whitaker at their farm. The house smelled of fresh bread, a comfort Ellen clung to since Sarah's death. Frank, his hands gnarled from years milking cows, handed Maggie a box of Sarah's things, letters, a mixtape of Dolly Parton, a photo of her in her deputy uniform. Ellen's eyes glistened as she touched the journal. She loved those woods, she said, but she said something was wrong out there. Maggie promised to find answers, though the weight of that vow settled heavily. Back at her small rental, Maggie studied the journal by lamplight. Entries mentioned night runs and Granger's man watching the trails. One line stood out. "Talk to E.G. He said drop it or I'm done." Was E.G. Earl Granger? Maggie's heart sank. Reopening the case meant challenging a man still revered in Tillamook, and his old deputies still worked in the department. She needed a team, but who could she trust? As she locked the journal away, a low rumble outside made her freeze. Headlights flashed through her window, then cut off. She grabbed her service pistol and peered out. A pickup truck idled across the street, its driver obscured. It lingered, then sped off into the fog. Maggie's grip tightened on the ring. Someone knew she had the journal, and they weren't happy. The fog clung to Tillamook's streets like a shroud as Maggie Holt sat at her desk in the county sheriff's office. The rusted .38 revolver and Sarah Whitaker's journal spread before her. It was late October 2001, and the damp Oregon air seeped through the station's old windows, carrying the faint scent of pine and sea. The journal's cryptic entries: trucks, no plates. Granger's deputy. Not safe. Burned in Maggie's mind. Sarah had been onto something in 1985, something tied to the forest trails, and it had gotten her killed. The revolver, now at the state crime lab in Salem for ballistics, might confirm it was the murder weapon. But the question gnawed at Maggie. Who hid it in the cave, and why? Maggie knew reopening a 16-year-old case in a town like Tillamook, where loyalty to the old guard ran deep, was a gamble. Sheriff Earl Granger, now retired, still cast a long shadow, his name etched on plaques at the county fairgrounds. His former deputies, some still on the force, eyed Maggie warily. She was an outsider now, despite her roots. She needed a team she could trust. She recruited Deputy Carlin Gwynn, a sharp 32-year-old who joined the department after a stint in Eugene's PD. Carla's quick wit and knack for computers made her a perfect fit for digging into early 2000s databases. Maggie also called in Dr. Leonard "Len" Baxter, a forensic pathologist from Portland who'd consulted on her cases before. Len, pushing 60, had a dry humor and an eye for details others missed. Together, they'd start unraveling Sarah's death. Maggie's first move was to interview Henry Larson, the retired forest ranger who'd found the evidence. She met him at the Rusty Anchor, where the jukebox played Willie Nelson's "On the Road Again," and the lunch crowd, loggers and cheese factory workers, swapped stories over burgers. Henry, his flannel shirt patched at the elbows, sat in a corner booth, his weathered hands cradling a coffee mug. "Found that gun and journal under rocks in the cave," he said, voice low. Looked deliberate, like someone wanted M hidden but not gone. He'd known Sarah, taught her to spot owl nests as a kid. She was always poking around those trails, he added. Said she saw trucks at night, no business being there. Maggie pressed him on the forest's history. In the 80s, the Siuslaw National Forest was a maze of logging roads, perfect for hiding illicit activity. Rumors of cocaine smuggling from California to Canada had floated, but Sheriff Granger's reports from the time dismissed them as hippie nonsense. Henry shook his head. Sarah wasn't one to chase ghosts. If she wrote about trucks, she saw him. He paused, glancing at the bar. "You know, Deputy Roy Tate was always out there, too. Granger's right-hand man. Still works here, doesn't he?" Maggie's jaw tightened. Roy Tate, now a senior deputy, had been part of the original investigation. His name appeared in Sarah's journal as Granger's deputy. Was he the one she'd seen? Maggie thanked Henry, who hesitated before adding, "Be careful, Maggie. Folks don't like the past stirred up." His words echoed as she left the bar, the neon sign flickering in the drizzle. Back at the station, Maggie and Carla dug into old case files, stored in dusty boxes in the basement. The 1985 investigation was thin: witness statements from hikers, a vague report on the cave, and Granger's conclusion that a transient likely killed Sarah. No mention of trucks or night activity. Carla, hunched over a clunky Dell computer, cross-referenced property records near Devil's Cauldron. "Here's something," she said, pointing to the screen. The land around the cave was leased to a company, Pacific Timber Company, in the 80s. Shut down in 89, but it was tied to a guy named Victor Hensley, big donor to Granger's re-election campaigns. Maggie's pulse quickened. Hensley, now in his 70s, owned a sprawling estate outside Tillamook, a recluse who rarely left his gated property. Pacific Timber had logged the Siuslaw trails, but could their trucks have carried more than wood? Maggie sent Len to Salem to rush the ballistics on a revolver, hoping it would tie to a known weapon. Meanwhile, she drove to the Whitaker farm to update Ellen and Frank. The couple sat in their cozy kitchen, the smell of apple pie mingling with the ache of memory. Frank clutched Sarah's journal, his voice rough. She wrote about Granger. Did he let her down? Ellen's hand trembled on her coffee mug. "Find who did this, Maggie. Please." That night, Maggie visited the Devil's Cauldron campsite, now overgrown with ferns. The limestone cave loomed nearby, its entrance dark and damp. She traced the path to where Sarah's body was found, her flashlight catching the glint of quartz in the cave walls. The journal's mention of trucks, no plates, suggested a smuggling route. But why kill Sarah? Had she confronted someone? Maggie's thoughts were cut short by the crunch of gravel behind her. She spun, hand on her holster, but saw only shadows. Her radio crackled, Carla, checking in. But the signal was weak, static hissing like a warning. The next morning, Len called from Salem. "Ballistics are in," he said. "The revolver matches the bullet from Sarah's autopsy. But here's the kicker. It was a sheriff's issue, standard in Tillamook in 85. Maggie's stomach dropped. One of Sarah's own could have killed her. She needed to talk to Roy Tate. But first, she pulled his personnel file. Tate had been on duty the night Sarah vanished, claiming he was patrolling the coast, not the forest. His alibi was backed by Granger, but no one else. Maggie set up a meeting with Tate, keeping it casual to avoid suspicion. She met Tate at the sheriff's office, his desk cluttered with fishing magazines and a photo of him with Granger at a 1980s county fair. Tate, now 55, had a weathered face and a guarded smile. "Heard you're digging into Sarah's case," he said, leaning back. "Waste of time. It was some drifter." Maggie mentioned the journal, watching his eyes. A flicker nervousness crossed his face before he shrugged. Sarah was nosy, probably guiding over her head. His tone was too casual, and Maggie's gut screamed he knew more. As she left the station, Maggie noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows hiding the driver. It pulled away as she approached, its taillights vanishing into the fog. Her hand brushed Sarah's ring, a talisman against the unease creeping up her spine. Someone was watching her, just as they'd watched Sarah. The journal and revolver had cracked open a door to Tillamook's past, and Maggie was stepping through, whether the town liked it or not. The fog over Tillamook thickened as November 2001 settled in, wrapping the town in a damp chill that seeped into Maggie Holt's bones. The Siuslaw National Forest loomed beyond her office window, its dark pines hiding secrets she was determined to unearth. Sarah Whitaker's journal and the .38 revolver, confirmed as the murder weapon, a sheriff's issue, pointed to a betrayal within the Tillamook County Sheriff's Department. The journal's references to trucks, no plates, and Granger's deputy suggested Sarah had stumbled onto a smuggling operation in 1985, one tied to Sheriff Earl Granger and possibly Deputy Roy Tate. Now, Maggie's investigation was stirring a hornet's nest, and the black SUV she'd spotted outside her rental hinted someone was watching. Maggie's small team, Deputy Carling Wynn and Dr. Leonard Baxter, gathered in a cramped conference room at the sheriff's office, the air heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and old paper. Carla had pulled more records on Pacific Timber Company, the firm linked to Victor Hensley, the reclusive businessman who'd bankrolled Granger's campaigns. Pacific Timber leased half the forest trails in the 80s, Carla said, her laptop screen glowing with scanned documents. They had access to every logging road near Devil's Cauldron. Perfect cover for moving drugs. Len, adjusting his glasses, added, the revolver's serial number was scratched, but the lab recovered enough to trace it. It was issued to the department in '83, reported lost in '86. Maggie's jaw clenched. Someone in the sheriff's office had covered their tracks. Maggie decided to dig deeper into Roy Tate. His cagey demeanor during their last meeting and his presence in Sarah's journal made him a prime suspect. She sent Carla to cross-check Tate's patrol logs from 1985, while she drove to the Lutheran church to meet Tom Whitaker, Sarah's younger brother. Tom, now 38, ran the family dairy farm with his parents, Ellen and Frank. He'd been 22 when Sarah died, and the loss had hardened him, his once easy smile replaced by a quiet intensity. They met in the church's small garden, where Sarah's memorial, a stone plaque with her name and a carved wildflower, stood under a cedar tree. Tom leaned against the fence, his work boots caked with mud. Sarah was always out in those woods, he said, voice low. That summer, she started acting strange. Kept a notebook, said she saw things, trucks, men at night. Told me to keep quiet about it. He handed Maggie a folded letter, yellowed with age, from Sarah's belongings. Dated July 10th, 1985, it read, Tom, if anything happens, check the cave. I saw Tate with them. Tell no one. Maggie's heart raced. Sarah had known she was in danger, and she'd named Tate. Why didn't you show this to anyone? Maggie asked. Tom's eyes dropped. I was scared. Granger was king around here. Still is. Back at the station, Carla had news. Tate's 1985 patrol logs were incomplete. Gaps on the nights Sarah noted truck activity. And get this, Carla said. Pacific Timber donated to the sheriff's department right after Sarah's death. New radios, vests, the works. Maggie's mind churned. Was it a payoff? She needed to confront Tate, but first, she wanted to visit Victor Hensley. His estate, a gated mansion overlooking the Pacific, was a fortress of privacy. Maggie called ahead, claiming a routine follow-up on forest land records. Hensley's assistant, a curt woman named Diane, agreed to a meeting the next day. That evening, Maggie drove to the Rusty Anchor to clear her head. The bar was lively, filled with locals swaying to Garth Brooks on the jukebox, the neon signs casting a warm glow. Betty Klein, the retired librarian, sidled up with a warning. Heard you're asking about the old days, she said, sipping a cola. Folks like Hensley don't take kindly to questions. Neither does Tate. Maggie nodded, her hand brushing Sarah's silver ring. The town's loyalty to its own was a double-edged sword. Community bound them, but so did secrets. The next morning, Maggie and Carla visited Hensley's estate. The mansion was all glass and cedar, a stark contrast to Tillamook's modest bungalows. Hensley, a wiry man with cold blue eyes, greeted them in a study lined with hunting trophies. Pacific Timber's long gone, he said, dismissing their questions about the 80s. Just a logging outfit. Nothing more. But his fingers tapped nervously when Maggie mentioned the forest trails. As they left, Diane handed Maggie a folder of old land leases, her expression unreadable. In the car, Maggie flipped through it and froze. A map showed a trail looping near Devil's Cauldron, marked private access for Pacific Timber. A handwritten note in the margin read, E.G. approved, 7/85. Maggie's pulse quickened. E.G. Earl Granger? The trail was a smuggling route, and Granger had signed off on it. She needed to talk to Granger, but he was elusive, rarely leaving his coastal cabin. She sent Len to dig into Granger's financials from the 80s, hoping for a money trail. Meanwhile, Carla hacked into an old county database, risky, but necessary, and found payments from Pacific Timber to a shell company, Coastal Ventures, linked to Granger's brother-in-law. The net was tightening, but so was the danger. That night, Maggie returned to her rental, the forest shadow pressing against her windows. She was reviewing the map when a crash shattered the silence, glass breaking at the back door. She grabbed her pistol, heart pounding, and crept through the dark. The kitchen window was smashed, a brick on the floor with a note tied to it. "Drop it, or you're next." Footsteps crunched outside, fading into the night. Maggie's breath caught as she clutched Sarah's ring. The conspiracy Sarah had uncovered was alive, and it reached higher than she'd feared, maybe to Granger himself. The November rain fell in sheets over Tillamook, turning the streets into rivers of mud and casting a gray pall over the Siuslaw National Forest. Maggie Holt's rental was still a crime scene, the broken kitchen window boarded up after the brick-throwing incident 2 nights ago. The note, "Drop it, or you're next," sat in an evidence bag on her desk, its scrawled warning looping in her mind. Sarah Whitaker's murder in 1985, tied to a smuggling ring in the forest, was no longer just a cold case. It was a live wire, and Maggie was gripping it. The .38 revolver, Sarah's journal, and Tom Whitaker's letter pointed to a corrupt network involving Sheriff Earl Granger, Deputy Roy Tate, and businessman Victor Hensley. Now Maggie's investigation was closing in, but the danger was closing faster. Maggie sat with her team, Deputy Carling Gwynn and Dr. Leonard Baxter, in a dimly lit corner of the Rusty Anchor, away from prying eyes. The jukebox played Tammy Wynette's "Stand By Your Man," its mournful chords blending with the clink of glasses and the smell of fried clams. Carla had dug deeper into Coastal Ventures, the shell company tied to Granger's brother-in-law. "It's a front," she said, sliding a printout across the table. Bank records show payments from Pacific Timber to Coastal Ventures, then funneled to offshore accounts. Started in '84, stopped right after Sarah's death. Len, nursing a coffee, added, "Granger's financials from '85 show unexplained deposits. Small, but enough to raise eyebrows." Maggie's fingers tightened around Sarah's silver ring. Granger had been dirty, and Sarah had paid the price. The journal and Tom's letter named Roy Tate as a player in the forest smuggling, likely cocaine moving through the Siuslaw trails to Canada. But Maggie needed hard evidence to confront him. She'd requested a formal interview with Tate, but he dodged, claiming a fishing trip. Granger, too, was elusive, holed up in his coastal cabin. Maggie decided to focus on the map from Hensley's estate, marked with Granger's initials and a private access trail near Devil's Cauldron. She and Carla planned to scout the trail, hoping to find traces of the old smuggling route. Before heading out, Maggie visited Ellen and Frank Whitaker at their dairy farm. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and fresh milk, but grief hung heavy. Tom was there, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "I should have spoken up back then," he said, voice breaking. "Sarah told me to stay quiet, but I knew she was scared." Maggie showed them the map, explaining the smuggling link. Ellen clutched a photo of Sarah, her deputy badge gleaming. "Was she alone out there?" she asked. Maggie promised answers, though the weight of that promise felt crushing. At dawn, Maggie and Carla hiked the trail near Devil's Cauldron, the forest dense with mist and the scent of wet pine. The path, overgrown but still visible, wound past the limestone cave where Sarah's body was found. Maggie's flashlight caught something, a rusted metal sign, half buried, reading Pacific Timber, restricted. Nearby, tire tracks, old but preserved in the clay, suggested heavy vehicles. Carla photographed them, her face grim. "This was no logging route," she said. "Too narrow for timber trucks." As they reached a clearing, Maggie spotted a pile of stones, unnatural in its precision. Digging beneath, she found a small, sealed tin. Inside was a microcassette tape, labeled SW, 7/85 in Sarah's handwriting. Back at the station, Maggie's hand shook as she played the tape on an old recorder. Sarah's voice, steady but tense, filled the room. "July 12, 1985. I followed the trucks. Tate was there, with Hensley's men. They're moving product, cocaine, I think north. Granger knows. He told me to back off, but I saw something else. A deal across the border. Canada. If I don't make it, this is why." The tape cut to static. Maggie's heart pounded. Sarah hadn't just been killed. She'd been betrayed by her own department, possibly by Granger himself. The Canada connection suggested a cross-border operation, bigger than Tillamook. The tape was a bombshell, but it raised questions. Why hide it in the forest? Had Sarah planned to retrieve it? Maggie sent the tape to Len for audio analysis, hoping to isolate background noises, maybe a voice or a truck engine. But the investigation was hitting roadblocks. The sheriff's office was buzzing with tension. Tate had allies, and Maggie's questions were drawing glares. Carla reported that someone had accessed their case files on the station's server, using an admin code only senior deputies had. Maggie's knee-jerk suspicion fell on Tate, but she needed proof. She decided to confront Granger. Driving to his cabin on the coast, she passed windswept cliffs and the roar of the Pacific. Granger, now 72, answered the door in a flannel shirt, his face weathered but defiant. "You're chasing ghosts, Holt," he said, blocking the doorway. Maggie mentioned the tape and the map. His eyes flickered, but he waved her off. Sarah was reckless. Got herself killed poking into things she didn't understand. His tone was too practiced, and Maggie noticed a new SUV in his driveway, far beyond a retiree's pension. That night, Maggie faced dissent within her team. Carla, usually steady, was rattled. "We're in deep, Maggie," she said at the station. "Tate's been asking about our searches, and the sheriff's office is stonewalling my requests for 85 logs." Len called with a warning. The tape's audio had traces of a second voice, male, indistinct, but possibly Tate's. Maggie felt the walls closing in. She needed to protect the tape and journal, so she locked them in a safe at her rental, installing a new deadbolt after the break-in. As she drove home, headlights flared in her rearview mirror, a black SUV, tailing her through the fog. She sped up, heart racing, but the SUV matched her pace, its high beams blinding. On a sharp curve, it swerved close, nearly forcing her off the road. Maggie gripped the wheel, Sarah's ring digging into her palm. The SUV peeled off at a side road, vanishing into the night. Shaken, Maggie pulled over, her breath ragged. The tape had exposed a traitor, and someone wanted her silenced. But the voice on that tape, Sarah's voice, was a call to keep going, no matter the cost. The rain had eased to a drizzle in Tillamook by mid-November 2001, but the air was heavy with tension as Maggie Holt gripped the steering wheel, still shaken from the black SUV's attempt to run her off the road. Sarah Whitaker's murder in 1985, tied to a cocaine smuggling ring through the Siuslaw National Forest, had unraveled into a conspiracy implicating Sheriff Earl Granger, Deputy Roy Tate, and businessman Victor Hensley. The microcassette tape, Sarah's voice detailing trucks, Tate, and a cross-border deal to Canada, was now locked in Maggie's safe, alongside her journal and the .38 revolver that killed her. But the threats were escalating, and Maggie knew time was running out to bring the corrupt network down. At the sheriff's office, Maggie huddled with her team, Deputy Carlin Gwynn and Dr. Leonard Baxter, in a storage room to avoid prying eyes. The jukebox from the Rusty Anchor, faintly audible through the station's thin walls, played George Strait's Amarillo by Morning, a bittersweet echo of the 1980s. Carla's latest dig into coastal ventures, the shell company tied to Granger's brother-in-law, revealed a paper trail, payments from Pacific Timber Company to offshore accounts, with deposits matching dates in Sarah's journal. Len's audio analysis of the tape confirmed a second voice, Tate's, with 80% certainty, arguing with Sarah about the boss's cut. Maggie's stomach churned. Tate wasn't just involved. He'd likely pulled the trigger. The evidence was damning, but the sheriff's office was a minefield. Tate's allies, including senior deputies loyal to Granger, were stonewalling requests for records. Maggie needed to act fast. She decided to stage a raid on a suspected stash site near Devil's Cauldron, based on the private access trail marked on Hensley's map. But first, she needed backup she could trust. She called on Lieutenant Maria Delgado, a state police officer from Salem who'd worked with Maggie in Portland. Maria, 45, was no nonsense, with a reputation for cracking organized crime cases. "You're poking a bear, Holt," Maria warned over the phone. "If Granger's dirty, he's got friends in high places." Maggie also reached out to Tom Whitaker, Sarah's brother, for any final insights. They met at the Lutheran church, where Sarah's memorial plaque gleamed under a fresh wreath. "Tom, his hands calloused from farm work, looked haunted. Sarah said the cave wasn't just a hideout, he recalled. She thought they stored stuff there, drugs, maybe guns. Maggie nodded. The tin containing Sarah's tape had been buried near the cave, a deliberate clue. Tom's eyes hardened. If Tate did this, don't let him walk. Maggie promised justice, though the weight of Sarah's ring on her finger felt heavier than ever. The raid was set for dawn. Maggie, Carla, Maria, and a small state police unit gathered at the forest's edge, the air thick with pine and mist. The trail to Devil's Cauldron was quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl. Armed with flashlights and warrants, they followed the map's path to a clearing where the rusted Pacific timber sign stood. Beneath a pile of brush, they found a trapdoor, hidden under years of overgrowth. Inside was a small bunker, empty now, but lined with shelves that smelled faintly of chemicals, likely cocaine residue. Carla swabbed for forensics, her face grim. This was a drop point, she said, big enough for a major operation. As they cataloged the site, a shot rang out, a rifle cracked from the trees. Maggie dove behind a log, her team scrambling for cover. Bullets chipped bark, and Maria radioed for backup. The shooter fled, but not before Maggie glimpsed a figure in a dark jacket, too fast to identify. Her heart pounded. Someone had tipped them off. Back at the station, Maggie confronted Tate, who was nursing a coffee in the break room. "Know anything about a bunker in the forest?" she asked, watching his eyes. Tate's smirk faltered. "You're digging your own grave, Holt," he muttered, brushing past her. His reaction confirmed her suspicions, but she needed more to arrest him. Maggie turned to Victor Hensley next. She and Maria drove to his estate, armed with a warrant to search his records. Hensley, cool as ever, let them in, his assistant Diane hovering nervously. In his office, they found ledgers from Pacific Timber, buried in a locked drawer. The numbers matched Coastal Ventures deposits, with coded entries for northbound shipments. But the real shock came from a faded photo tucked in the ledger. Granger, Tate, and Hensley at a 1985 county fair, grinning with a fourth man, a known Canadian smuggler, later arrested in Vancouver. The cross-border link was real, and Sarah had died for it. The confrontation came that night. Maggie, Maria, and state police surrounded Tate's house, a modest cabin near the coast. Tate surrendered without a fight, his face pale as they cuffed him. In interrogation, he cracked under pressure, admitting he'd worked for Hensley's smuggling ring, moving cocaine through the forest to Canada. "Sarah saw too much," he said, voice flat. "Granger ordered me to handle it. I shot her." Maggie's blood ran cold. Sarah was dead, betrayed by her own sheriff. Tate's confession confirmed her murder, but Granger and Hensley were still free, and the network's full scope, how many cases it tainted, how far it reached, remained unclear. As Maggie left the station, exhausted but resolute, she visited the Whitakers. Ellen and Frank sat in their kitchen, the smell of apple cider mingling with grief. Maggie told them Tate's confession, watching tears stream down Ellen's face. "She's really gone," Frank whispered, clutching Sarah's photo. Tom, silent, punched the wall, his knuckles bleeding. Maggie promised more answers, but the victory felt hollow. Sarah's body had been found years ago, her justice delayed by corruption. As Maggie drove home, the fog seemed thicker, hiding threats still lurking. Granger and Hensley were next, but the fight had just begun. The December wind howled off the Pacific, rattling the windows of Tillamook's sheriff's office as Maggie Holt prepared for the final push. It was late 2001, and the arrest of Deputy Roy Tate for Sarah Whitaker's 1985 murder had shaken the town to its core. Tate's confession, that he'd shot Sarah on Sheriff Earl Granger's orders to protect a cocaine smuggling ring tied to Victor Hensley's Pacific Timber Company, exposed a festering wound in Tillamook's heart. But Granger and Hensley remained free, their influence still casting shadows over the Siuslaw National Forest and the community Maggie had sworn to protect. With Sarah's journal, the .38 revolver, a microcassette tape, and ledgers linking the network to Canada, Maggie had enough to dismantle the conspiracy. But the cost of justice loomed large. Maggie's team, Deputy Carlin Nguyen, Dr. Leonard Baxter, and Lieutenant Maria Delgado from the State Police, worked around the clock. The Rusty Anchor, once a haven of 1980s nostalgia, with its Conway Twitty tunes and neon glow, now buzzed with whispers of betrayal. Locals packed the bar, debating Tate's arrest over plates of fried oysters, their trust in the sheriff's office shattered. Maggie felt the weight of their stares as she entered, her hand brushing Sarah's silver ring for strength. The evidence was solid, but Granger and Hensley were slippery, backed by wealth and connections. Maggie needed airtight proof to bring them down. Carla's tech skills proved crucial. Using early 2000s forensic software, she traced Coastal Ventures' offshore accounts to a Canadian front, confirming the smuggling route Sarah had uncovered. The ledgers from Hensley's estate, paired with the photo of Granger, Tate, Hensley, and a Canadian smuggler at the 1985 county fair, tied the network together. Lens analysis of the microcassette tape isolated engine sounds, trucks matching Pacific Timber's fleet. Maria, coordinating with state police, secured warrants for Granger's cabin and Hensley's mansion. "This goes beyond Tillamook," Maria said, her voice grim. "The feds are watching now. Drug enforcement agencies involved." The takedown came on a frigid morning. Maggie led a joint task force, state police and DEA agents, to Granger's coastal cabin. The air smelled of salt and cedar as they surrounded the property, flashlights cutting through the dawn fog. Granger, now 72, surrendered quietly, his face etched with resignation. In his study, they found a locked safe containing bank statements and a ledger mirroring Hensley's, detailing payments for northbound shipments. Granger's defiance crumbled in interrogation. "It was just business," he muttered. Sarah wouldn't let it go. He admitted to ordering Tate to deal with her after she threatened to expose the operation, though he claimed no direct role in her murder. Hensley was next. His estate was a fortress, but the DEA's warrant breached its gates. Victor, his composure cracking, tried to flee through a back exit but was caught. His office yielded more evidence. Encrypted emails from the early 90s, linking him to Canadian traffickers, and a hidden compartment with cocaine samples, likely kept as leverage. The scope of the corruption stunned Maggie. Over a dozen cases in Tillamook had been tampered with, witnesses intimidated, or evidence lost to protect the smuggling ring. The network had funneled millions through the forest, exploiting its trails and the town's trust. With Granger and Hensley in custody, the legal fallout was swift. Tate pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, facing life without parole. Granger was charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder, sentenced to 20 years. Hensley faced federal drug trafficking charges, his empire dismantled as assets were seized. The DEA uncovered ties to a Vancouver cartel, leading to arrests across the border. Tillamook's sheriff's office underwent a state-led overhaul, with new leadership and anti-corruption protocols. A whistleblower hotline was established, a nod to Sarah's courage in documenting the truth. Maggie visited the Whitakers to deliver the news. The dairy farm's kitchen was warm with the smell of fresh bread, but Ellen and Frank's faces bore the scars of 16 years of grief. Tom sat with them, his knuckles still bruised from punching the wall. Maggie recounted the arrests, confirming Sarah's murder was solved. Her body, found in the limestone cave in 1985, had finally received justice. Ellen clutched Sarah's photo, tears falling. "She was so brave," she whispered. Frank nodded, his voice rough. "She deserved better." Tom, eyes distant, added, "Build something for her, so folks remember." Maggie promised to try, though the closure felt bittersweet. Sarah was gone, her life stolen by greed. The town rallied to honor Sarah. At the Lutheran church, a memorial service filled the pews, locals singing Amazing Grace, as the jukebox at the Rusty Anchor fell silent for the day. A scholarship fund in Sarah's name was launched, supporting women in law enforcement, and a plaque was added to her memorial garden. Deputy Sarah Whitaker, 1957 to 1985, Guardian of Truth. Maggie spoke at the service, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Sarah stood for justice," she said. "Her fight lives on in us." Epilogue, 2010. 9 years later, Maggie, now 55, stood at Devil's Cauldron, the forest quieter but no less wild. She'd retired from the sheriff's office, her limp worse from years of chasing truth, but her heart was lighter. Tillamook had healed, its cheese factory thriving, the county fair bustling with new traditions. The sheriff's office, under new leadership, was a model of transparency, its reforms a legacy of Sarah's case. Maggie ran a mentorship program through Sarah's Scholarship Fund, guiding young deputies with the same fire Sarah had. She visited the Whitakers often. Ellen and Frank, now in their 70s, had turned their farm into a community hub, hosting school groups to learn about dairy and Sarah's story. Tom had married, his daughter named Sarah, a spark of joy in their healing. The limestone cave, once a place of horror, was now a protected site, marked with a sign honoring Sarah's sacrifice. As Maggie stood by the cave, the wind carried the scent of pine and sea. She touched Sarah's ring, now worn thin, and smiled. The past was at rest, and Tillamook's future was brighter for it. The summer of 2010 draped Tillamook, Oregon, in a golden haze, the kind that softened the edges of the Siuslaw National Forest and made the Pacific's waves shimmer like a memory. Maggie Holt, now 55, stood at Devil's Cauldron, the clearing where Sarah Whitaker's life had ended 25 years earlier. The limestone cave, once a silent witness to betrayal, was now a protected site, its entrance framed by a simple wooden sign. In memory of Deputy Sarah Whitaker, 1957 to 1985, Guardian of Truth. Wildflowers, lupins and daisies, dotted the clearing, their colors muted under the late afternoon sun. Maggie's hand brushed Sarah's silver ring, worn thin from years of carrying her friend's memory. The forest was quiet, save for the rustle of pine needles and the distant call of a gull. The weight of 2001's investigation, the arrests of Roy Tate, Earl Granger, and Victor Hensley, the dismantling of their cocaine smuggling ring, had settled into a hard-won peace. But Maggie knew justice came with scars. She limped slightly, her old knee injury flaring with the damp coastal air as she traced the path to the cave. The investigation had changed Tillamook forever, exposing a corrupt network that had exploited the town's trust for profit. Tate was serving life without parole for Sarah's murder, his confession in that dimly lit interrogation room a wound Maggie still felt. Granger, now frail in a federal prison, had been sentenced to 20 years for conspiracy and obstruction, his legacy as sheriff tarnished. Hensley, stripped of his wealth by federal drug trafficking charges, faced a life sentence, his Pacific timber empire reduced to a footnote in Tillamook's history. The DEA's raids had unraveled a cross-border cartel, with arrests in Vancouver tying up the Canadian thread Sarah had uncovered. The sheriff's office, once a bastion of loyalty to Granger, now operated under a reform-minded leader, with transparency protocols and a whistleblower hotline inspired by Sarah's courage. Maggie's thoughts drifted to the Whitakers, whose grief had anchored her resolve. Ellen and Frank, now 74 and 77, had turned their dairy farm into a community hub, a place where schoolchildren learned about milking cows and Sarah's story. Their son, Tom, 47, had found purpose in fatherhood, naming his daughter Sarah to keep his sister's spirit alive. The town, too, had healed. The Tillamook Cheese Factory drew tourists, its 1980s charm preserved in faded signs and creamy cheddar, while the county fair buzzed with new traditions, cotton candy, Ferris wheels, and a booth for the Sarah Whitaker Scholarship Fund, supporting women in law enforcement. The rusty anchor still played Johnny Cash and Garth Brooks, its neon signs glowing like beacons of nostalgia. But the conversations now carried pride in the town's redemption. Maggie knelt by the memorial sign, placing a single wildflower at its base. She'd retired from the sheriff's office 2 years earlier, her body tired but her spirit unbroken. The investigation had taken a toll, sleepless nights, the black SUV's threats, the brick through her window, but it had also given her purpose. She now ran a mentorship program through Sarah's Scholarship Fund, guiding young deputies with the same fire Sarah had shown. Her small home in Tillamook was filled with relics of the case, Sarah's badge, framed on a shelf, the microcassette tape, preserved as a reminder, a faded county fair poster from 1985, a nod to the era that shaped her. The jukebox in her memory still played Dolly Parton, its chords a bridge to the past. She drove to the Whitaker farm, the road lined with pecan trees and memories. The farm was alive with laughter, school kids on a field trip, chasing each other through the barn. Ellen greeted Maggie with a warm hug, her face lined but brighter than in 2001. "You gave us our girl back," she said, her voice soft. Frank, leaning on a cane, nodded, his eyes on a photo of Sarah in her deputy uniform, now displayed in a small farm museum. "Kids learn about her," he said, "her courage." Tom joined them, his daughter, little Sarah, 6, clutching his hand. The girl's dark hair and bright eyes echoed her namesake, and Maggie's heart ached with bittersweet pride. "She's got her aunt's spirit," Tom said, ruffling Sarah's hair. "Wants to be a cop someday." Maggie followed them to the museum, a converted shed filled with Tillamook's history, old milk cans, a 1980s tractor, and a corner dedicated to Sarah. Her badge, donated by Ellen, sat in a glass case beside her journal and a newspaper clipping. Tillamook Sheriff's Scandal Exposed. A placard told Sarah's story, her discovery of the smuggling ring, her betrayal by Tate and Granger, her sacrifice. Maggie's throat tightened as she read the final line. Her legacy lives in justice and reform. A group of teenagers, part of the tour, listened as Ellen recounted Sarah's love for the forest, her hikes to Devil's Cauldron, her belief in protecting her town. One girl asked, "Did she know she'd be a hero?" Ellen smiled through tears. She just wanted to do right. Later, Maggie joined the Whitakers for dinner in their kitchen, the air warm with the smell of fresh cornbread and chili, a nod to the community dinners of the 80s. Frank raised a glass of cider. "To Sarah," he said, his voice steady. "And to you, Maggie." They toasted, little Sarah giggling as she clinked her juice cup. Tom shared plans to expand the farm's outreach, partnering with the scholarship fund to host law enforcement workshops. "It's what she'd want," he said. Maggie nodded, feeling Sarah's ring against her skin, a quiet reminder of promises kept. As dusk fell, Maggie drove to the Tillamook County Fair, its lights twinkling like the neon signs of the Rusty Anchor in its heyday. The fair was a celebration of resilience, families laughing, couples dancing to Alan Jackson, vendors selling cheese and homemade quilts. At the scholarship booth, Maggie met Carla and Gwen, now 41, and a captain in the sheriff's office. Carla, her hair streaked with gray, handed out flyers for the fund, her laptop open to a new training module on ethics. "We're cleaner now," she told Maggie, "because of you and Sarah." Maggie smiled, thinking of the whistleblower hotline, the reform department, the lives saved by rooting out corruption. The fair centerpiece was a new statue, unveiled that evening, a bronze figure of a deputy, badge gleaming, inspired by Sarah. Maggie stood with the crowd as the mayor spoke, his words carried by a crackling microphone. "Sarah Whitaker showed us truth matters," he said. "Her fight rebuilt this town." Applause rose and Maggie's eyes stung. She remembered Sarah's laugh, her campfire stories, her stubborn courage. The statue's face wasn't Sarah's, but its spirit was resolute, kind, unbreakable. Maggie's final stop was the Lutheran church, where Sarah's memorial garden glowed under soft lanterns. The plaque, now weathered, bore fresh flowers from the community. Maggie sat on a bench, the night air cool, the scent of cedar and sea salt mingling. She thought of 2001, the fog, the danger, the betrayal. She'd faced Tate's smirk, Granger's lies, Hensley's arrogance, and come through. The town had, too. The smuggling routes were gone, the forest trails now hiked by families, not criminals. The cave, once a tomb, was a place of pilgrimage, a testament to redemption. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, a habit she'd picked up from Sarah. In it, she'd written names of young deputies she mentored, each carrying a spark of Sarah's fire. One, a woman named Emily, had just joined the state police, citing Sarah's scholarship as her inspiration. Maggie smiled, tucking the notebook away. The ring on her finger, thin but enduring, felt warm. "You did it, Sarah," she whispered. "We did it." As she drove home, the radio played Merle Haggard's My Favorite Memory, its chords weaving through the night. Tillamook's lights faded behind her, but its heart, resilient, honest, rebuilt, shone bright. Sarah's legacy wasn't just a plaque or a scholarship. It was a town that believed in justice again, A family that found peace. A detective who carried her friend's light forward. Maggie parked at her house, the stars clear above. She stepped inside, Sarah's badge gleaming on the shelf, and knew the past was at rest, its lessons etched in Tillamook's soul.